Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Friday, June the 14th, 2024. So it is Donald Trump's 78th birthday, and I'm sure you'll join me in wishing him a great day, and may all his hopes for the future come true, perhaps. So I did want to consider his horoscope in this video, but I wanted to be specific about what I wanted to consider. I wanted to consider his solar return. So the solar return is when the sun returns to where it was when you were born, and it happens every year. Now, different people do this in different ways. I like to do my solar returns based on the place of birth, not the location of birth where you are on your birthday. Now, the reason for that is that I don't think you can escape your fate by moving to a different location. Now, there are incredible examples of solar returns based on your location of birth. For example, the kidnapping of Adolf Eichmann in 1960, when the Israelis kidnapped him in Buenos Aires, and of course he was born in Germany, and his solar return for Buenos Aires fitted a lot better than his solar return for where he was born. So I'm not giving this as an absolute rule. I'm just saying this is how I do my solar returns in general. And there is then the question that if you have a solar return that's good, doesn't this just make it easy? We can just strip everything away, not worry about transits, directions, perhaps horary questions we might want to ask. We just look at someone's solar return, we see what the year ahead is going to be like, and on the basis of that solar return, we can tell whether they're going to win or lose the presidential election. So in theory, we can just set up a chart for Donald Trump's solar return set for where he was born in New York, and that will give us a good idea. I mean, his solar return, by the way, for this year is not very good. But maybe it's more complicated than that. Well, of course it's more complicated than that. The solar return is just one thing you have to look at. And what I did want to do in this chart, aside from just look at Donald Trump's solar returns, is look at the solar returns for a load of presidential candidates, to get an idea about how well it worked. And hence that explains some of the pictures on the thumbnail. You know, what was Hillary's solar return like on her birthday in end of October 2016. But there's a further issue. Now, some people claim that a solar return can act, what's the word? Let me get this right. That that it can act retrospectively. And this becomes important in the case of Joe Biden. So Joe Biden has got a birthday on, I think, November the 20th. So his birthday is after the presidential election. So you got presidential election November the 5th, and then you got his birthday on November the 20th. So if I want to have an idea about whether or not Joe Biden is going to win this election, of course, I must emphasize that you cannot really tell this on the basis of a single solar return. But anyway, in Joe Biden's case, he had a birthday November the 20th, 2023. So in theory, his solar return to the end of November 2023 should last him through until November the 20th, 2024. So Joe Biden's solar return covering the presidential election really should have already happened. And so if we're trying to work out whether Joe Biden has got a better solar return than Donald Trump for this year. Well, we should look at his 2023 chart. But there are some people that say, well, he's born very close, just after the presidential election, November the 20th. So maybe we should look at his November the 20th, 2024 solar return to work out whether or not he's going to win the election 2 weeks before, particularly as it gives an indication of, I suppose not quite the inauguration, but the re-inauguration, because obviously the president doesn't become president until the following January. So there is a bit of an issue there. And in Joe Biden's case, we have markedly different solar returns for between November 2023 and November 2024. And so I want to look at that. So that's my theme in this video, and it's going to be a bit of a list. I'm a bit wary of doing videos which are just a bit of a list, loads of presidential solar returns one after another. I don't know how many I'll be able to fit in, but I'll see what I can do. Anyway, before I look at that, I want to look at the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Friday, June the 14th, 2024. So this is the astrological picture for today. And we can see that the moon is still in Virgo at noon in New York. And it's a changeover day. So actually the moon moves from Virgo to Libra at 12 minutes past 7 in the evening, London time. So if you're in Western Europe, moon in Virgo for most of the day, but this evening, I don't know what you're planning on doing this evening, you will have the moon in Libra. It's going to be slightly different. Perhaps you can be more relaxed with the moon in Libra. There's more space for being yourself. Maybe we're not going to be quite so concerned about small details, and from a social perspective, things should pick up. Now, if you are in the Americas, well, in New York, the moon moves into Libra at 12 minutes past 2 in the afternoon. So last part of the day, you've got moon in Libra. If you're in Los Angeles, moon moves into Libra at 12 minutes past 11 in the morning. So on the west coast of America, you've got moon in Libra pretty much for most of the day. On east coast, last half of the day. If you are in India, Asia, when really moon doesn't really move into Libra until tomorrow, and certainly it doesn't move into Libra until tomorrow if you're in Australia or New Zealand or the Philippines, for example. So that's the moon. I think we shouldn't be too concerned about the moon being in Libra. Moon does actually make a lot of aspects in the last part of Libra. It makes a square aspect to Mercury. It makes a square to the Sun. Makes a trine to Uranus. It makes a square to Venus. It makes an opposition to Neptune. I think these squares between Mercury, Sun, and Venus are possibly quite important. I think that with those squares, Virgo moon squaring those Gemini planets, there could be a fair amount of irritation. Just annoying things that need to be sorted out. Though on the plus side, I think our mind is going to be pretty active. Mercury rules Gemini. Mercury also rules Virgo. So it's a very mercurial contact. Lots of things buzzing around our head. That's kind of how I like to see it. Just annoying things buzzing around our head. We're trying to do something, and then something's buzzing around and we have to attend to it. And so that could be a bit of an issue there. But I don't really want to exaggerate it. It's not such a big deal. And the two main aspects for today are not involving the moon. First thing is that the sun is conjunct Mercury, exact. So you could say there's a cazimi conjunction between the Sun and Mercury. Isn't that great? Well, we saw what happened with the cazimi conjunction between the Sun and Venus. It wasn't very impressive. At least I found it rather unimpressive. It was quite debilitating. It sort of slowed things down. So I don't think that Venus was particularly strengthened by that cazimi conjunction. Likewise with this conjunction between the Sun and Mercury, I suspect that for most of us, this Sun conjunct Mercury is not going to be helpful. It may just make it difficult to see what's going on. And we may be prone to making mistakes simply because we can't see the wood from the trees. So that really is a possibility. Though, if you do go for the cazimi view of the world, in other words, that when a planet is exactly conjunct the Sun, it is strengthened, well, you could say, well, Mercury is emphasized. I think Mercury is emphasized today, actually, for better or for worse. There are certainly things to say. There are certainly things to think about. And I suppose if we can deliver our message with power and conviction and not be put off by other people's reaction, we maybe can be effective. But we do have to be careful about anything to do with Mercury, thinking, communication, making decisions. Though on the plus side, of course, once Mercury is past that conjunction with the Sun, it starts to strengthen because it's now free of the Sun, or getting free of the Sun. Just wanted to have a quick check on what Mercury is doing later on in the month. I mean, Mercury is not going retrograde anytime soon, so Mercury is able to power away from the Sun, and indeed in a couple of days' time, Mercury will change sign, and so it will be in a different sign from the Sun. So when Mercury's in Cancer, the Sun is in Gemini, there may be a feeling that Mercury has escaped and that we can start making sense of what's happening, and there's sort of a certain sense of freedom there, and also clear-mindedness. But there's another aspect going on. I think the most important aspect today, and that is a semi-square between Mars and Saturn. Now, I think this aspect is difficult. I'm certainly not looking forward to it. Mars and Saturn as a pair, as we know, Saturn is the greater malefic. Mars is the lesser malefic. You put them together and you get a lot of frustration. The world is complicated. Mars. Remember, Saturn is coming to a standstill. Goes retrograde at the end of the month. I think at 1926 Pisces, and so yeah, this semi-square between Mars and Saturn could be very frustrating, and it may be just difficult to get things done. And at the same time, there could be bad things going on. I mean, not necessarily affecting us, but just out there. We're just reminded that it's a dangerous world, and if you're in a disaster zone, things could be particularly disastrous. So be a little careful with that Mars semi-square Saturn, and don't push it. And that is the overall picture for today from a geocentric point of view. Turning to the heliocentric view. Here we have it. Notice that geocentrically we had Sun conjunct Mercury. That means by definition that heliocentrically we have Earth opposition Mercury. And There you have it, Earth opposition Mercury. And I kind of like that better in the sense of the symbolism. And it perhaps gives us information about how this aspect works. Earth opposition Mercury means, Earth is here, we're here down on Earth, trying to work things out. And Mercury is about our ideas and their opposition. Mercury opposition the Earth. I mean, ideas are a problem. Communication is a problem. It's all a struggle. It really is a struggle to get our message across. And matters probably aren't helped by the fact that both the Earth and Mercury are moving to a heliocentric square of Neptune. There you have it. Earth moving to a square of Neptune. Mercury moving to a square of Neptune. And so it's going to be very difficult to make decisions over the next few days. When I look at the astrology for the weekend, I mean, I'm going to be probably talking about this more. And also we have Venus square Mars. And heliocentrically, we can see that Venus has changed sign. Venus has just gone into Cancer, and Mars has just gone into Aries. So that heliocentric Venus square Mars, it is separating, it is true, but I think it's still pretty operational. And have a look at Pluto. So we've got Venus, quincunx Pluto. Pluto is at 0 degrees Aquarius. Mars is at 0 degrees Aries. All of those zeros are important. Sign changes in heliocentrically. I mean, logically, you wouldn't want to take them too seriously, but I do understand that people who are into, financial astrology, who do use heliocentric astrology quite a lot, and they do take heliocentric sign changes seriously. And the fact that we've just got these 3 planets at 0 degrees of the sign could be important. And it's a change, but it's also the fact that we have got Venus and Mars and Pluto all configured with each other. So there is a lot of intensity. There could be power struggles, people trying to get their way, the issues regarding, charisma and sexuality and attractiveness could be important. Attractiveness works in many ways. As I said yesterday, talking about Venus-Mars, it's a particular kind of attractiveness, and it's an attractiveness that is not appealing to everyone. It's the Venus-Mars person, someone who does have a close Venus-Mars aspect in their chart can be attractive, but it's a particular kind of attractiveness that doesn't appeal to everyone. If you want to be, if you want to be a universal sex symbol, it probably is best not to have any aspects between Venus and Mars, because Venus and Mars will particularize one's attractiveness. So that is the heliocentric picture. It's actually, I would have said, quite powerful, and I will be returning to the heliocentric picture as usual tomorrow. But just a reminder that we have got a heliocentric T-square forming with Earth opposition Mercury with Neptune on the T. Okay, so having done that, I want to look at the astrology for the 12 signs for today. So let's go back to the geocentric picture. And these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Friday, June the 14th, 2024. Aries. Aries, the big aspect today is a semisquare between Mars and Saturn. And I think you have to take this aspect very seriously. Mars is your ruler, and it's semi-square Saturn, and Saturn can be a difficult influence. And Aries, you might find that it's difficult to get things done. things are slow. And it's not a day when you can push things. Yes, I understand you're an Aries. You can be very impatient and you want results right now. But I'm hoping that you now realize that that's not possible. I mean, remember, Mars is now in Taurus. Just a reminder, it's really establishing itself in Taurus. And Taurus is a slow sign. I know you had fun when Mars was in Aries. I hope you had fun when Mars was in Aries, but it's not in Aries anymore. You do have to be slow and very deliberate in what you do. And you really shouldn't be expecting immediate results. And there may be some significant obstacles today that you have to deal with. Now, some of these obstacles could be psychological, and I don't mean that in a bad sense. I'm not talking about anything clinical. It's just that you have your own desires, you want things to happen, but there's something else happening, maybe at an unconscious level, which is just holding you back, and this might be annoying, and indeed you might blame others for what's going on, but it's really not a time for blaming others. You need to basically accept your responsibility, and on a physical level it's important that you are extra careful today. The moon is moving through Virgo, which is quite a physical sign. It's an earth sign. And so Moon in Virgo can put the focus on health and well-being. So when you've got Mars square Saturn, Moon moving through Virgo, just really, Aries, do be extra careful. Now, as far as relationships are concerned, yesterday there was a heliocentric square between Venus and Mars. Now, that heliocentric square is still in operation, and I don't know whether it's relevant or not. I have to think about it a bit more, but from a heliocentric point of view, today Mars moves into Aries. Now, that's not the same as geocentric Mars moving into Aries. I don't even know whether it really is important, but it probably means something. And I think that in some ways you're going to have some kind of inspiration that you want to do something because of that heliocentric sign change, and you want to do it. Of course, as I've already said, it's not a time for taking immediate action, but something is forming here. Just allow it to form. Don't take action on it. Let the thing develop. And also with this Venus-Mars square, Venus is actually moving into heliocentric Cancer at the same time as Mars is moving into heliocentric Aries. There could be a sense of your own charm. So although I have been a bit down on today, I think actually you are quite charming and charismatic with this Venus square Mars. Not charming and charismatic to everyone. Some people might find you not charming at all. Indeed, maybe half the population will not find you charming, but the other half will. So that's important, that you make the right choices, that you hang around with the right people, you hang out with the right people, you try to mix with the right people, and somehow you've got to use your feelings to work out where you should be. But whatever you're doing, don't take risks. It's just not that kind of day. Taurus. Mars continues moving through your sign, of course. Mars is sort of gathering strength in Taurus. I mean, if that's the right word, gathering strength. I mean, Mars doesn't actually work particularly well in Taurus, as I've already suggested in earlier videos. But still, Mars is an energizing force. I think Taurians are more energized than usual with this sign change, and I do understand that there are certainly things that you want. and maybe you want them quickly. But Mars, while it moves through your sign, through Taurus, it does make a semi-square to Saturn. And so that means that you may be slowed down, and perhaps you have to ask yourself, who is going to slow you down? I think it may be people who you feel should know better. It could be, I don't know, it could be friends, people you spend time with. You think that people are going to help you, going to make things move more quickly, but it may actually be the opposite. And certain people could be a real drag on your resources and just almost bring you to a standstill. So do be careful there. Don't take other people too seriously, and don't get angry. If anyone is holding you back, is making things difficult for you, try to understand what the situation is all about. Now, another thing going on, Taurus, is that you do have to be quite disciplined today, I think, in terms of making things happen. There are things you want to make happen, and I think that over the last couple of days you've been actually aware of what you can do, and indeed what you enjoy doing, and that's good. But things are starting to change, and what used to be very kind of easy, enjoyable, may start to become a little bit of a chore, requires a little bit of focus, and that shouldn't be a problem. Just you have to accept that it needs a little bit of organization and time management, and so that's happening over the course of the day. And I think that's going to be especially important if you're a Taurian who is in the Americas. Things were fun; they can still be fun, but maybe they need to be. You need to be a little bit more organized now. I mean, for example, maybe I'm a Taurus. I've got Taurus rising, so I try to do this YouTube channel. I actually enjoy doing it. I do enjoy making these videos. So if I'm trying to talk to myself, I'm just giving myself as an example. I do enjoy it, but the challenge here, and I suppose I'm not born in America, I'm not an American citizen, but I'm in America, so I suppose I have to categorize myself I could categorize myself as an American Taurian. Then, I have to realize that it's not just about fun, just not about just talking in front of the camera. There's some organizational stuff that I need to do as far as this YouTube channel is concerned, and I'm not doing it. And it's not just about enjoyment, it's about getting certain details right. So that's an example. So I don't know what your equivalent is. So I think you know it. I think you know that something needs a little more work, that if you really want to make the most of it, you will have to put more work in. And if you're not an American Taurus, well, if you're a European Taurus, that would be more about this evening, perhaps. I don't know what you're doing this evening. Maybe it's just too late in the day. And if you're in Asia, Australia, New Zealand, that would be about tomorrow. Don't worry. It's just that in America, things happen first, or appear to happen first. And in Australia and New Zealand, they tend to happen last, at least in terms of one's subjective experience of time. Gemini, you are still feeling that you would like to kind of keep a low profile for much of the day. I mean, to an extent, that does depend on your time zone, but I think that all Geminis start the day being quite focused on their own space and wanting to do things their own way and not maybe looking for too much excitement. I know that Geminis often enjoy excitement, but for much of it today, no, I think you're just happy with the way things are, and you don't want irritation. The moon is making a square to Mercury, it's making a square to Sun, it's making a square to Venus. You don't want any of that. You know how you want to you know how you want to run your day, and you don't want to be told otherwise. And at the same time, Gemini, you might have some rather strange ideas. You might be starting to focus on things that other people don't want to touch. But you find it very interesting. Now, I don't know what this is about, but where are you planning on going? Where do you feel your energies want to go? Because I think some Geminis might want to push their energies into some very strange and maybe controversial areas, which could be risky, but they could also be profitable. And I suppose you need to sort of pursue that a little, but with caution. But it could also be about your imagination. The Gemini imagination is going in strange ways, and I think that you might be attracted to media, and whether it's films or books which are describing things which are quite disturbing. For example, it might be a great day for Geminis to watch horror films, maybe, or to watch, I don't know, true crime stuff about how awful humans are. Geminis can be a bit like that. But just because you want to watch a horror film or some documentary about horrendous crimes doesn't mean that you should try to pursue this kind of excitement in the real world. But going back to the moon making these square aspects between Mercury, Sun, and Venus, yeah, it is certainly at the beginning of the day a situation where you just feel irritated and you want to be left alone. You want to do things, in your own space. But the moon does change sign. Now, if you are in the Americas, the moon changes sign late morning, early afternoon. And so in the Americas, it is a bit of a day of two halves. You start the day, moon in Virgo, being very quite sensitive about your own space, wanting things done in a particular way. Then the moon moves into Libra, and there's a great sense of freedom. A lot of the irritations are starting to pass. You're feeling that you can, express yourself more, and other people are going to be more sympathetic to your needs. And these irritations I was talking about are going to start to fade. If you are in the Western Europe, then that's going to be more about this evening. And so I don't know what you're doing, whether you're going to be awake, but in London, that's 12 minutes past 7 in the evening. In Paris or Berlin, that's 12 minutes past 8. So it kind of depends where you are. If you're further east, then, really moon is going to be in Virgo all day. So it's perhaps a day when you're going to be trying to defend your little space, and you're not going to get the full moon in Libra experience until tomorrow. Now, one other thing I should say, Gemini, is that today the Sun is exactly conjunct Mercury. And quite how this works may depend on you, but I think for most Geminis, the Sun conjunct Mercury is unlikely to be positive. It just may be that you can't see the wood for the trees, that something is just blocking your vision, and it could be a very bad time to make decisions because you just don't see it all. some things are being hidden. It may be that you're just misinterpreting the facts, or you're getting the wrong facts, or you're not getting enough facts. Though there is a Cazimi theory, the theory that when Mercury is exactly conjunct the Sun, it is really strong. And I don't want to discount that possibility. It may be that there's just going to be a moment today when everything comes together, when you're just on the right wavelength, things fit, and you can communicate with power and conviction, and at the same time you're going to be crystal clear in your mind about what needs to be done. So do look out for that moment of clarity, but maybe that moment of clarity won't happen. And so I suppose it's a bit experimental, isn't it? How is this Cazimi effect when the Sun is exactly conjunct Mercury? How is it actually working in practice? And I suppose, as I've been talking about Sun conjunct Mercury, I suppose I should say when the Sun is exactly conjunct Mercury. So the Sun is exactly conjunct Mercury at 5:32 p.m. London time. So that would be 6:32 p.m. Paris or Berlin time. It would be around lunchtime in New York, 9 o'clock in the morning on the West Coast. Something you will experience tomorrow if you are in Australia, New Zealand, or East Asia. So do consider that Sun conjunct Mercury, because I do think that it is quite important. Cancer. It sort of depends on where you are, because the moon does change sign today, and the moon changes sign from Virgo to Libra, and of course the moon is you. The moon is your ruler. So if you are a Cancerian who's in the Americas, then late morning, early afternoon, the moon is going to move from Virgo into Libra, and you're going to feel that things are changing, that there's less emphasis on annoying details and more emphasis on balance and harmony. And it would be a time for looking after yourself, not worrying too much about what the world is thinking, and just only interacting with people who are harmonious. And that can be something that you can have. Indeed, once the moon moves into Libra, particularly today, because the moon doesn't really make any aspects, it doesn't really make any major aspects in early Libra, except, it does make a trine to Jupiter and a trine to Pluto. That's not entirely true. So in fact, when the moon moves into Libra, it actually starts making a grand trine with Jupiter and Pluto. And so you can start to pick up on that energy if you're in the Americas, late morning, early afternoon. If you're in Europe, you start to get that energy this evening. So there is that changeover for Cancerians. So things are getting better. They are getting less complicated. But if you're in Asia, Australia, New Zealand, you've got Moon in Virgo all day, and in that case, things are more complicated because the Moon is still making square aspects to Sun, Mercury, Venus, and there could be annoyances. And just lots of action, small actions that you don't really want to do, but you have to do it, and you have to go from this place to that place, and it just could be an irritating day if you are eastwards, Asia, New Zealand, Philippines, Australia. But I mean, don't worry, it's going to pass, because the moon will eventually move into into Libra. But if you are an American Cancerian, or if you're a West European Cancerian this evening, there is a sense that the day is going to start to become less complicated, and there's going to be more scope for relaxation, and you can start to tune into that trine with Jupiter and Pluto. So yeah, you can relax, but you don't have to be lazy. I suppose the moon is starting to pick up on that Jupiter-Pluto trine, which is separating now. And that moon-Jupiter trine will sort of gently encourage you to make things better for yourself. But you don't have to pressurize yourself. It's just small moves can have a big impact eventually, but again, there is no pressure. So I think that could be fortunate for Cancerians, but it's not in itself a particularly big deal. Now, if you are doing a lot of socializing today, Cancer, which I don't think you should be, but if by any mischance or misfortune you're spending a lot of time with other people, I think you're going to feel somewhat frustrated and annoyed. I don't think having a lot of people around you is going to be particularly helpful. It could be aggravating, it could be a waste of time, and you may just end up achieving absolutely nothing. And worse, you just could exhaust yourself. So do choose your company carefully, wherever you are, whatever part of the world you're in, Cancer. Just choose your company carefully. Don't overload things, and just remember that the one person you can really trust is you yourself. Leo. There is a conjunction between the Sun and Mercury today. And if you've been listening to my previous forecast for other signs, the first 4 signs, you might have noticed that I'm being a little bit downbeat about this conjunction between the Sun and Mercury, because Sun-Mercury conjunction, means that Mercury is overwhelmed by the Sun, and Mercury just cannot think straight. Now, this Sun-Mercury conjunction is important for you because the Sun is your ruler, and so you take on the nature of Mercury. Okay, Mercury doesn't actually have a nature. In some respects, it's a bit like tofu. It takes on the nature of its surroundings. But the Sun-Mercury conjunction, I think in your case, is probably quite fortunate because it allows you to express yourself. The Mercury principle, the communicative principle, is with you. It's close to your heart. I think that's actually what the word Kazemi means. It's a Kazemi conjunction. It is absolutely close. It's around your heart. I think Kazemi is actually an Arab word relating to the heart and something being close to the heart. And so the whole communication principle is very much with you today. And you are going to be able to communicate with power, and I think that people are going to listen to you. And I think it's also going to be important that you don't say more than you have to. The best speeches, are done very simply. I remember when I was at school, I wasn't really very good at debating. I thought I was good at debating, but I wasn't actually good at debating. But there was this teacher, this very intelligent, bright teacher, and he gave this, I think he ended up becoming some history professor in the end, and he gave this advice about speaking, public speaking, and he said, stand up, speak up, and shut up. And that's perhaps what it's all about today, Leo. Stand up, speak up, and shut up. Work out what your message is, say it, and then just go away. You've delivered your message, and that is it. And so that's perhaps what you should focus on. And yes, get it right, and you'll communicate, and you'll be able to get your message across very, very well. But you have to understand that there is a limit to it. You have your time on the stage. You make the most of it, and then you job done. So I think that this Sun-Mercury conjunction could be very positive. Yet some Leos might find that they have some rather unusual ways of expressing themselves. It's how the words come together. And it's like when you are struggling to find an analogy or a metaphor to describe something, the words you might use are actually quite unusual, and you might want to use distressing analogies. I was listening. I mean, for example, I'll give you an example of a distressing analogy, which I found distressing analogy. I was watching some YouTube video, and there was this commentator, Andrew Neil, who's a British commentator, and he was talking about how disastrous things were for the Conservatives, and he was asking someone what they thought about the Conservative campaign and so forth. And he said words to the effect, what's worse, the Conservative campaign or the Bataan Death March? I mean, that is an incredibly, I thought that was quite a stunning comparison to make. I mean, the Bataan Death March, American soldiers being marched to death by the Japanese in the Philippines. I mean, that was a strange analogy to make with the Conservative campaign in the UK. But there's somehow some kind of similarity. The Tories got themselves into that mess, but these poor American soldiers on the Bataan Death March, not really. Maybe it was their generals that got them into that mess. But I think, Leo, you can make that analogy quite quickly. So do be careful about the metaphors you use, because you might just find yourself using quite extreme metaphors about distressing events, because it feels like the best way of making your point. But you do need to consider your audience a little. So aside from that, Moon is moving from Virgo into Libra. A lot of Leos have been concerned about money, I think, and there is an opposition actually between the Moon and Neptune. Yesterday we had an opposition between the Moon and Saturn. Now we've got an opposition between Moon and Neptune, and I think some Leos are going to feel a little bit a bit of uncertainty about money if they want to focus on money. If you ignore money, maybe that's not an issue, but if you start to think about money, you might be, the details might start coming to you, and you might be thinking, well, does this add up? Can this add up? Is this going to be okay? And then there might be a bit of concern here and there. So that's something to perhaps consider. And I don't want you to get overly concerned about money, because there is a certain sense of exaggeration. You might see a small problem and turn it into a big problem. So if you're dealing with money, just be careful, but don't panic. And then the Moon does move into Libra, and I think when the Moon moves into Libra, that changes the emphasis. It moves things completely away from money. That sign change, late morning, early afternoon if you're in the Americas. If you're in Australia, it's tomorrow, or New Zealand, it's tomorrow. If you're in Western Europe, it's this afternoon. It's this evening. So that does depend. But just in general, don't allow money matters to drag you down and to cause you grief, which actually may be unnecessary. And once the moon moves into Libra, whenever that might be, you'll be able to get a better perspective on the matter. Virgo. There is a lot going on in Gemini, and of course Gemini is an important sign for Virgos. I mean, Gemini is a sign that is ruled by Mercury. Of course, Mercury rules Virgo as well. And with all of this, emphasis, you want to be successful. You want to get noticed, and that's great. But Mercury, which is your ruler, is exactly conjunct the Sun. And I think that this exact conjunction to the Sun needs to be treated with a certain amount of caution. It's something of a two-edged sword. Now, in a positive sense, Mercury conjunct the Sun may be strengthening. You may feel moments today when you feel very strong, very powerful, very clear about what you want to do. You know, there was complications as two things. As the Sun and Mercury were getting closer and closer, there was confusion. You weren't sure what to do. Does it go this way? Does it go that way? But as Mercury conjuncts the Sun, as they moved onto the same harmonic, onto the same wavelength, which will happen today, then there's going to be a sense of oneness and clarity, and that you have your idea and it is clear, and you can really understand what needs to be done. But you do have to get that moment right. And as you are trying to work out what needs to be done, there's still scope there for confusion. And it may even be the case that that moment where the Sun where the Sun is exactly conjunct Mercury is not a moment of total clarity, but a moment of total confusion. But maybe the clarity comes from the total confusion. When everything is a complete mess, when you can't see anything, then suddenly you see the light. And that is the possibility. And that particularly applies to the way forward. What is the next step? And I think that is what a lot of Virgos are thinking. Where are we moving to next? What is the next thing we need to do? And I think that today you can start to understand what the next thing that needs to be done actually is. And while this is happening, the moon, which is in late Virgo, is making square to Mercury, square to the Sun, square to Venus, and it is making the opposition to Neptune. I actually think that the squares between the moon and Venus, Sun, and Mercury are actually going to be quite fortunate for you. Perhaps not for other signs, but for you, I think it's good. I think it does emphasize the fact that you have a clarifying sense of purpose. Yes, there are going to be moments when you could make terrible mistakes. I think you're most likely to make terrible mistakes today if you listen to other people, because the moon is opposition Neptune. And that means that I think that the advice you're getting from outsiders could be catastrophic. Could be, or it could be at least unhelpful, because people are going to be telling you things without really understanding you. You know, people very often give advice based on their own subjective view of the world, and they dump their advice onto you. And I don't think it's the right advice. So I would suggest that today you are very self-contained. You make your own decisions. You stand by your own decisions. If you make a decision and it goes wrong, at least you will know that it's your decision. And it will actually be easier to unpick it if you know it's your decision. If you just do what someone else says, then you don't really understand the logic for that person telling you to do something. And it's not going to work out. So I would say really try to be independent and try to work things out in your own way. Now, the moon does leave Virgo today. If you're in the Americas, late morning, early afternoon, moon leaves Virgo, moves into Libra. I think that the first feeling you're going to get when the moon moves into Libra is a sense of a sense of emptiness almost. It will be like you've done what you need to do, and now you can perhaps relax. Though later, as moon progresses through Libra, I think you'll start to see that there is actually a financial dimension to moon being in Libra. But I don't think that need worry you. I mean, the first aspect Jupiter makes when moon moves through Libra is a trine to Jupiter, sorry, a trine to Pluto, then it makes a trine to Pluto, sorry, a trine to Jupiter. I think actually you can take advantage of that, but I want to talk about that more tomorrow. So that's it, Virgo. I think the main thing is that there are going to be moments of clarity, which could also be moments of utter confusion. And if you want to have the best chance of having a successful day, then don't listen too hard to other people. Libra. The moon is moving through the end of Virgo, getting ready to move into Libra, which is your sign. And so the sign change does depend on your time zone. If you are in the Americas, then late morning, early afternoon, the moon moves into Libra. It'll be even earlier if you're in Hawaii or Alaska. If you're in Australia or New Zealand, then really that's more about tomorrow, or is about tomorrow, moon moving into Libra. If you're in Europe, the moon moves into Libra sort of early evening. So it does depend, but it is a changeover day with the moon moving into Libra, moving from Virgo into Libra. And so with the moon moving through Virgo, I think that many Librans have felt a little bit out of sorts. You've not really been particularly in the mood for being engaged with other people and their issues. You felt that it was best to be on your own and to work things out in your own way. And I think that's very much the picture for today, or at least the first part of the day if you're in the Americas. There are things you're trying to make sense of, and you're trying to work out what you believe in, and what is right, and what is indeed morally right. There may be some moral questions for some Librans. You're perhaps considering a course of action, and maybe you know that some people might not like it, some people might not be upset, some people might be upset about it, and there are questions here. There are questions about whether it is the right thing to do, and you don't want to reveal your hand right now, not least because you don't actually know what's in your hand. And so there is a good reason there to just perhaps take it easy. And at the same time, your understanding of what is going on, what the full picture is probably less than perfect. I think you have the information, but you really haven't processed it. Maybe there's something you need to read. Maybe something really boring. It may be you've got some report that you need to read and you haven't read it. And until you read it, until you understand it, you're going to be none the wiser, even though the information is right there in front of you. Now, when the moon does move into Libra, things do change. So I'm talking about being in the Americas, for example, early afternoon, or in Western Europe and parts of Africa early this evening. There is a change as the moon moves into Libra. You are going to feel more definite, and I also think more positive, because as soon as the moon moves into Libra, it starts making a trine to Pluto and a trine to Jupiter. Now, that trine to Pluto and Jupiter, you're more going to feel that tomorrow, and I will be talking in detail about that trine tomorrow. But as far as today is concerned, you're just starting to feel that something is coming together, that things that were actually all over the place are now connecting, and you can see the links between different things. And I think that is really going to help you. And really, that's the main thing to say. I did want to make one point for the future, is that Venus is currently at 2649 Gemini. Just a reminder that Venus is soon going to move into Cancer. It's not there yet. You've got a few days to wait, and while you're waiting, perhaps it's a time of preparation, because it's a big change. Venus moving from Gemini into Cancer. Let me just tell you when that exactly is. Venus moves into Cancer on the 17th, which is 14, 15, 16. That's on Monday. So it's not you're not there yet, but just start getting ready for Venus moving into Cancer. I think when Venus moves into Cancer, there are going to be a set of responsibilities that you're going to have to start addressing, and you've got the weekend to relax and to think it through. But when Monday happens, you do need to be ready. Finally, I should point out that we do have this heliocentric Venus-Mars square, and in fact, heliocentrically, Venus is now in Cancer, and Mars has moved into Aries. I don't know whether heliocentric sign changes mean much, but with that Venus-Mars heliocentric square, it was exact yesterday, but I think you still feel it. There is a possibility, Libra, that certain people are a bit annoying. You clash with them, and it may be an emotional clash. And this is particularly the case if you're very close to someone. If you're dealing with, for example, an intimate relationship with this Venus square Mars heliocentrically, it could be exciting, it could be quite passionate, but the issues of attraction and repulsion could be very strong with this Venus-Mars square, and it does need to be managed. And Venus needs to look after itself. So if you're involved in a close relationship, particularly a very close relationship today, do be careful and do have your eyes wide open. Scorpio, you have to watch out a bit today, because Mars, which is your ruler, is semisquare Saturn, and Saturn can be a real problem when it's semisquare Mars. At the very least, it may be quite difficult to get things done. Things may be slow, and what you thought was going to be easy might actually be really difficult. And you may feel that one thing holding you back is other people's irresponsible behavior, or people just being inconsiderate and not considering the implications of what they're doing. And that could be frustrating, especially as Mars, your ruler, is in Taurus, which is your opposite sign, because Scorpio is your sign. Taurus is the opposite sign. You've got Mars in Taurus, so that means that you are really at a stage when you are strongly influenced by other people and what they're doing. And if other people are not behaving correctly and are being irresponsible, that could really annoy you. So there is scope for being really frustrated. I think for your part, you need to be as tolerant as possible, and perhaps you shouldn't get yourself into a situation where you are totally reliant on other people and other people's whims, because if you are completely reliant on other people, then that does mean that your success and failure is reliant on them. And so yes, there could be a great deal of frustration there, and you have to consider your own anger and the way your anger is flowing. Scorpio anger should never be underestimated, and you want to make sure that your anger is flowing, because what you don't want is your anger to go inwards and to trip you up. So if you are angry and you try to do something too quickly, your anger may manifest perhaps as, some kind of accident. I mean, I don't mean a serious accident or anything, but just tripping or just being too hasty and breaking something, or, you know what I mean. So do try to take it easy and don't allow sort of petty irritations to get you down. And maybe it's then a situation where you might be best off when you're not having to worry about other people. And towards the end of the day, I think Scorpios will have greater scope for distancing themselves from the world and its problems, just finding some space. I think that's what you can find, and that's perhaps what you should be moving towards as you progress through the day. I think if you're in East Asia, Australia, New Zealand, it's going to be quite difficult to distance yourself from other people, and you may have to grin and bear and exercise that patience and tolerance that I think is so important, but not too much patience and tolerance, because if you exercise too much patience and tolerance, then you just get even more angry because you're stopping the flow of the anger. And it's just very important that your emotions are flowing, because if they're blocked, then the blockage can lead to an accident or a mistake. The unconscious can work in all sorts of strange ways, and we want to accept what we're feeling and not try to deny it. Sagittarius, you really want things to happen. You're ready for things to happen. But at the same time, you have to take into account other people, and that is a real pain. I mean, you just feel perhaps that left to your own devices, you'd have absolutely everything under control and nothing could stop you. But unfortunately, in many cases, you're not being left to your own devices. You've got other people to deal with, other people to worry about, and those other people could really bring you to a standstill, or at least that's how it feels. And so what do? Well, okay, so we've got Moon square Mercury, Moon square Sun, Moon square Venus, Moon opposition Neptune. Okay, if you are in the Americas, this may not be such an issue, but I think you still are going to have to deal with it at some level. But with these aspects, you have to not be overwhelmed by the pressure, by what people are talking about, by what people are saying. People say a lot, and you're not actually expected to listen to every single word that people are saying. If you try to listen to everything that people are saying, you would just be completely overwhelmed. You've got to pick out the broad themes. And that really should be what Sagittarius is all about. Sagittarius is not a sign for getting sidetracked by tiny little details. But the aim of Sagittarius, which is a Jupiter-ruled sign, is to see the broad picture. And once you see the broad picture, you can start to ignore the little trivialities and start to concentrate on what really matters. And so I think that is what you should be striving for. Also, you do not have to take people as they are. You can actually change things. So if you look at your social environment and all your contacts and everyone you know, and it might just all seem to be a bit of a mess, you can actually act in a transformative way and change people's attitudes. And part of that transformation may be about prioritization, maybe just accepting that certain people are just surplus to requirement, you don't need them, don't have to worry about them, and by being more focused on the people who are useful. And it could be really quite transformative. And in the process, by putting more energy into the relationships and contacts that matter, you will actually start getting some really good feedback because you're paying more attention to people. Just remember, people want attention. And so by focusing on the people who matter, the people you have identified as mattering, then you're going to start to create some real changes. And remember, it is all about relationships on a longer term perspective. You know, Jupiter, your ruler, has been in Gemini since the end of May, last couple of weeks, and it will stay there for a year. And so, this next year is all about making the most of your various contacts and relationships. And that also means creating change. And I think that today you're starting to actually see the reality of that. Just starting to see that, you don't need to be friends with everyone. If you scatter your social resources, then you're going to underperform. So just concentrate on the people that matter, that the people you identify as being useful. Now, turning to one-to-one relationships, there is a conjunction between the Sun and Mercury today. And that Sun conjunct Mercury may indicate that there is someone who's got a lot to say for themselves, a lot. And you have to work out whether or not they really know what they're talking about, or whether or not they're completely confused. Because it's very difficult to know how this exact Sun conjunct Mercury is going to be working out. It just may be that there are certain people who are very clear and can be trusted, and because they've got the right idea, and there are other people who are totally 100% deluded. And this goes back to what I was saying. You have to make social choices. And I suppose you have to rely on your Sagittarian intuition to make the right choices. Capricorn. there is a bit of a change going on. The moon is moving from Virgo to Libra, and that this sign change is about you maybe finishing up a process of making up your mind. You're starting to make some decisions now, and these decisions could be quite important. You've had a chance to, over the last couple of days, to ask some serious questions, and now things are making sense, and you're able to work out what needs to be done, and also to prioritize. I think that you have had a lot of things to do over the last couple of days, and I think maybe today you're finishing them up. You find a lot of it rather irritating. I mean, the moon makes square aspects to, I don't know, Mercury, the Sun, and Venus, and there's just work that's being finished off, and you're preparing for a change. And when the moon goes into Libra, it's a time when you feel a new sense of direction, and you perhaps are going to feel also that you're breaking free. There have been a lot of irritations over the last couple of days, and they seem to be coming to a head, or maybe they've already come to a head, and now the situation is calming down, and you can start to be more focused on yourself and what you want to achieve, because I think achievement is going to become very important. If not today, then it's going to be tomorrow. And I think that you're going to want to quite actively pursue your number one or number two skills, because you've got certain skills now that are really coming into their own, skills which just other people don't really have, and you're aware of that. And with these skills, over the weekend you can perhaps fine-tune these skills even more. And I think that, I don't know what your plans are for the weekend, but I think perhaps over the weekend you probably will feel a need to have quite a high profile, because you feel that you need to be seen and heard, because you've got something that definitely needs to be offered, and you don't want to miss your chance. So, Capricorn, it is a time of transition, and you don't want to be forced to ask too many questions, because really these questions have already been answered, and you are probably going to become more relaxed as the day progresses. And so overall, I don't think that it's a particularly spectacular day, but I think it can be a day when you can tie up loose ends and start preparing for the next challenge. And really, Capricorn, I forgot. There's one other thing I do have to mention. Mars is semisquare Saturn. That's actually a big deal. Mars is quite an irritating influence, and it's semisquare Saturn. It's 45 degrees from Saturn, and Saturn is your ruling planet. Mars is an irritant. It is something that really could be very annoying and very frustrating, and there just may be one thing that you really feel is important. It's important to you. And remember, I was just talking about your skills, and I think that your skills really are moving into top form. You're very aware of these skills. You really understand which skills matter and what skills you should be bringing out into the open. And this Mars semi-square Saturn may be an irritation about one or two of your skills, something you're good at, something you're really good at, but you're not quite getting there. It's almost there, but you're not quite there, and it's really annoying you. And the temptation might be perhaps to just give up on it, but that's not the right approach. You just need to be able to see it through. Mars square Saturn, I think in this case, should be about a blast of a hard work, but not destructively hard work. Hard work can be destructive. You need to have a sense of intuition for what you're doing and why you're doing it. And so when you hit that frustration, as I think you might, something's just not working and you might have doubts about yourself, but keep going. You may have to talk to someone, get a little piece of information that it's just you don't have it right now. You need to get it. And once you've got it, things will suddenly fit together. And then you can perhaps start to make the most of that Mars square Saturn. Mars square Saturn can be really hardworking, can be very focused. So just one thing needs to be finished off, and it might be painful, but Capricorn, I'm convinced that you can do it. Aquarius. When I'm talking about Aquarius, I often go over things that I've just talked about with Capricorn. The issue here is that Capricorn and Aquarius are both ruled by Saturn. And so we do have to look for both signs at what is going on with Saturn. And as I was just saying to Capricorn, there is a semisquare between Mars and Saturn, and this Mars-Saturn square could be annoying. It could be frustrating. It might feel that it could bring you to a halt. It needn't bring you to a halt. I'm just warning you about it. And so, where would this Mars-Saturn semisquare hit home? Where is it likely to cause the most problems? I'm guessing it would be connected with money. Something financial today could be really annoying. It just needs work, and you just might regard it as being something so unnecessary. Maybe someone's messed up. Maybe you've messed up. Or some little detail that you have forgotten or you've ignored, and now you've got to confront it. And so that could be a pain. It could also relate to your home. Mars has gone into Taurus recently, and so with Mars going into Taurus, it does mean that many Aquarians are going to be putting more energy than usual into their home and their family. Even if they're not, home and family pressures are likely to take up quite a lot of your time, or more time than usual. And so Mars moving through Taurus, semi-square Saturn, could be that something connected with your home today, or your home, or perhaps it's what your family are doing, just could be really annoying. It could just make you irritated. Why do you have to bother with this? You had your own way of doing things, and now you're having to deal with this, and it's just annoying. And I think it's just important, though, that you try to be understanding of what's going on, and that you don't exaggerate, because with Mars semi-square Saturn, there may be a certain tendency to try to smash a peanut with a sledgehammer. So there could be an annoyance which in itself is quite minor, but you might over-exaggerate. You might regard it as the end of the world, that it brings everything to a halt, that it makes future progress impossible. So that there is a real chance of that happening. I mean, it is possible, but it needn't happen. I think that Aquarius, you need some distance and you need some space. And I think that's going to be easier if you are in the Americas, because if you're in the Americas, then late morning, early evening, the moon changes sign from Virgo into Libra. So while the moon has been in Virgo over the last couple of days, you've had some quite powerful thoughts, and it's all been a bit intense, and you've perhaps been asking questions you didn't want to answer. And now the moon is in Libra. At least last part of the day, if you're in the Americas, it's in Libra, and that does give you some space, and you start to feel the moon making a trine to Pluto and a trine to Jupiter, and so you're able to see things in a new and positive and optimistic way. And so if there are frustrations, whether it's about money or family, I think you'll find it easier to sort of rise above it all. If you're in other parts of the world, then you may have to wait a bit. It may not be until tomorrow, Saturday, that you get a chance to see things in perspective. So my advice there would be, if something is annoying you, if something is really annoying you, then perhaps you should wait. Wait until the moon goes into Libra, as it will do. And if you're in East Asia, Australia, New Zealand, that's not going to be until tomorrow, but it will move into Libra, and then I think that things will be much easier, and you'll be able to get a clearer perspective. Pisces. This aspect between Mars and Saturn, which I've just been talking about to Capricorn and Aquarius, I think it could affect you, because Saturn is in Pisces, it's in your sign, and Mars is semisquare Saturn. I think in a general sense, Pisces, you may feel a bit tense, that things aren't entirely going your way, but it's a feeling. I don't think it's necessarily about anything objectively happening, but there is a question of how you respond to this feeling. I think that with Mars semisquare Saturn, there may be something about the way you communicate which is a little bit angry. You don't really mean to be angry, but the anger might nonetheless be manifesting. And I think this also reflects your view that some people really are quite annoying, because while we have Mars semisquare Saturn, we've also got the moon making square aspects to Mercury, Sun and Venus, and also making an opposition to Neptune. And so you can see people for what they are, and you can see how they're behaving, and it's not great. It just doesn't seem right, and it just feels that you're having to do things other people's way, and you don't want to do it, and you just kind of want to be left alone. And so that's another reason why you might feel somewhat agitated, and matters aren't going to be helped by the fact that I think that some people are just not making the right decisions. They're just focusing on the wrong things, and you're very aware of that. And so what do you do? Well, you could just wait it out. I think that by tomorrow at the latest, I think you'll be more self-contained, and I don't think you'll have to put up so much with other people and their petty concerns. Additionally, you should not cast yourself into a role of powerlessness. There is a sense in which you might create this this narrative where you don't have any power and it's other people making all the decisions. That narrative would, I think, be completely wrong. Actually, you have a considerable amount of power. I mean, at the beginning of this piece on Pisces, I talked about Mars semisquare Saturn. And okay, it's not a great aspect, but it's a very powerful aspect. And Saturn is in your sign. Saturn semisquare Mars is about you potentially being able to wield considerable influence. It's a heavy influence. It's a tough influence. It may not be very nice, but you can certainly get people to take note of you, and the things you say could be also very powerful. Again, I don't think you're going to be in the mood for saying nice things just for the sake of it. You're not really in the mood for pleasantries, but still, you know how to get noticed. And also, you can survey the social situation, everyone you know, and you can make changes. You just do not have to be satisfied with the way things are. And if you want things to change, you can make it change. Well, some people are not going to be happy. They are not. But if you assert yourself, then I think you'll have no difficulty really taking control of the situation. Again, you're not going to make yourself too popular, but some things just have to be done. And that's it for the 12 signs. And what I am going to do now is look at today from the perspective of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Friday going to be like for those watching the I Ching segment of this video? And the first hexagram I got was 27. Hexagram number 27, the corners of the mouth. So you can see that. Looks like a mouth, doesn't it? There you've got, I suppose you've got the lips, top lip, bottom lip. There's the mouth in the middle. You can see that. So with the 27 corners of the mouth, in a general sense, it is about what people are eating. And one view of the corners of the mouth is that you can judge people by what they eat, what they want to eat, what inspires them. So if someone is, I don't know, really turned on by money, and it's money that makes them tick, then that's the way to judge them. If someone is, I don't know, talking about alcohol all the time, they're always wanting to know where they can get a drink, what they're drinking, they're talking about alcohol all the time, then perhaps in this case this person is motivated by alcohol, for example, the corners of the mouth. So always ask that question when dealing with people. What motivates them? What do they eat? What do they feed on? Because once you know what someone feeds on, you're able to understand them, and you can make decisions about whether or not they can be trusted. At least that is one approach with the corners of the mouth. Another approach is to say, well, corners of the mouth is about eating, and it's about digesting. And if we've eaten something, what can happen is that our cheeks can bulge. I suppose if you imagine just eating, and the first thing that's going to happen is cheeks are going to bulge, and that means that basically we're not going to be able to do anything or say anything because it's going to take us time to consume what's in our mouth. And there might be an indication here that we're in a situation where we have consumed a lot, we've taken on a lot, not necessarily food, but in general, we've taken on a lot. And now it's time where we need to digest. So we shouldn't be taking on anything more because we've got to digest what we've got. So that is a warning. If you feel that you're overloaded, then accept the situation and do not take on more stuff, because just otherwise you're going to be completely overwhelmed. And we have a moving line, bottom line moves. And the bottom line is warning us that we should be satisfied with what we've got, and we should be working on what we've got, and we shouldn't be too worried about what other people have got. In other words, we need to be self-reliant, and we should watch out for envy. You know, all of us are capable of envy, and we shouldn't be looking at other people and making comparisons about what they've got, perhaps the food and sustenance they've got, thinking, well, they've got more food, more sustenance than us. We might see that in a very literal sense. We need to be satisfied with what we have, and that is really, really going to be very important. And it's also important that we are self-reliant. Though this may apply to other people. I know I'm talking about potentially our envy, but it may also indicate other people's envy. We are perhaps in an envious environment where things have gone basically down to a sort of animal level. You know, it's kind of amazing, isn't it, that humans have these airs and graces, that they're somehow special, but really humans just fundamentally they just behave like animals, really. They just have their basic priorities. When I watch hummingbirds defend their territory, that's the most amazing animal in Washington State. You did not imagine that you'd find. I always thought hummingbirds were tropical, and in fact, they're all over the place here, and it's just quite amazing, these hummingbirds. But these hummingbirds, they're quite aggressive. They're quite aggressive to each other, and they really do protect their territory. And that's what humans do. They protect their territory, and animals do it. They too. Has that squirrel got more food than me? We're all the same. We're all animals. And I suppose with the corners of the mouth, there is a lot of jealousy. People just are concerned about what you've got, what I've got. Have you got more than me? Have I got enough nuts to last me through the winter? Steer clear of my hummingbird feeder. It's that kind of thing. We're all animals, and we all have the same rivalries and jealousies as animals, and we flatter ourselves by thinking that humans are special, and of course we're not. But that is a danger there. And now this hexagram, because we've got bottom line moving. Bottom line moves to hexagram 23, which is splitting apart. And that's the reality of the thing. A lot of people are jealous of each other. A lot of people, there are rivalries. I don't think it can be helped. And as a result, things are splitting apart. And I'm afraid this is not a great hexagram. It would be nice to end on a pleasant hexagram, but splitting apart is just, it's like the inferior people. I'm using inferior people just in the I Ching Confucian way of using the word inferior. I'm not being prejudiced here, and it's all from our subjective perspective, but the inferior people are rising up. They're in control, and there's nothing we can do short term just we need to accept the situation and we need to back off. We need to retreat. We have to let things run their course because things are splitting apart. I think the image here is of a couch. You can see, but it's looking a bit weak. It's perhaps everything's been eaten and it's about to collapse. This structure. So there is a structure, but it is about to collapse, and I don't think it's helped by other people's petty jealousies, thinking about what you've got, what I've got, and I think you have to be very careful in terms of dealing with your social environment, whether it's in your family and your work. It's all getting a bit unpleasant, and soon enough things could split apart. But remember, this is a hexagram for today. This is not for the next 10 years. So because I do an I Ching hexagram every day, that does kind of, I think, diminish its power. And for our part, though, it's just a good idea to just perhaps accept the situation and to back off and not to become part of it and not to become part of the corruption that is all around us. So if other people are being jealous and wondering who's got what, do we have to be part of it? We somehow have to just be distant and try to have a more spiritual and philosophical perspective. But we need to protect ourselves. If we do see real splitting apart, if the inferior elements are really all over the place, then we really do need to back off. And that's the I Ching. And now I want to consider solar returns and presidents. So that's and presidential candidates. So I wanted to consider solar returns pre-election. And, this is always a problem because, you have the election in the United States in November, and then in January, the winning candidate becomes president. Well, that was the case until I think around the Second World War. I mean, D Roosevelt, he was elected. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was elected in November. He was elected in November 1932, but he didn't actually become president until March 1932. So I thought Roosevelt's solar return might be a good place to start. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at a number of presidential solar returns, and then I'm just going to finish with Biden and Trump and see if I can see anything there of any use. So so here's Roosevelt's chart. So Roosevelt was, so here he was. So here's Roosevelt's chart. He was born in 1882. So, and his solar return, you can see, he was born January the 30th. So he was an Aquarius. So his birthday came between the 1932 election and him becoming president. So he became president in March. So if you look at his solar return for just before the presidential election, you would take his 1932 solar return. So the question is, does this solar return indicate a man who is about to win elections, about to win the election? And this solar return is quite spectacular because of that Sun-Mars conjunction. So Franklin Delano Roosevelt, he had an exact Sun-Mars conjunction on his birthday, on his solar return. The question is that Sun-Mars conjunction good or bad? And in fact, what does it say about the Cazimi conjunction? And I think that I think this chart is really showing victory here. So here's the logic I would go. So we have Scorpio rising. So the ruler of Scorpio is obviously is Mars. Forget all this idea that it's Pluto. In fact, this chart provides good evidence that the ruler of Scorpio is Mars and not Pluto. And the midheaven is Leo. And we've got Jupiter in the 10th house. Jupiter in Leo in the 10th house. That is a good signature of victory. Now, if you take William Lilly's perspective, it's this solar return. It's a nighttime chart. So Jupiter rules the fire signs by night. So Jupiter has dignity in terms of being triplicity ruler, the triplicity of the fire signs. So ruler of the midheaven is the sun, ruler of the ascendant is Mars. And the sun and Mars are exact. So the midheaven is the aim, it's the target, it's the White House. And Mars, you could say, well, in a way, that's Roosevelt himself. And the fact that the sun and Mars are exactly conjunct suggests to me that this is a sure sign of victory. We shouldn't worry about the fact that the sun is supposedly weak because it's in Aquarius, the sign of its detriment. We should be interested in the fact that this is a cazimi conjunction between the sun and Mars. Cazimi as in exact. It's and that is incredible. So ruler of the ascendant and the ruler of the midheaven are conjunct, and I think that this solar return clearly indicates that FDR was going to win the following election. Now, you could say it might have indicated other things. Now, if, for example, he'd been assassinated that year, then okay, that would have fitted Sun-Mars conjunction. But it's the fact that it's cazimi really makes the chart, I think, very powerful. So skipping a few decades, there is the 1960 election. So the 1960 election was when Kennedy was up against Nixon. And so here is John F. Kennedy's chart for 1960. So the election was in November 1960. And I wouldn't have said this is necessarily an amazing chart. Okay, we've got Jupiter in the 10th. Remember, Roosevelt had Jupiter in the 10th just before the election. And so it's Jupiter in Capricorn in the 10th. I don't think that in itself is particularly spectacular. Jupiter, though, having said that, Jupiter, regardless of being in Capricorn, Jupiter is ruler of the ascendant. Again, very important to use traditional rulers. Don't think that Neptune rules Pisces. Jupiter rules Pisces. So you could say ruler of the ascendant, Jupiter, is in the 10th house. So you could say, well, that is Kennedy winning the election because, ruler of the ascendant in the 10th. Now, this is very much a sort of post hoc justification. There are things wrong with this chart. I don't particularly like the fact that South Node is in the first house. The Sun is not particularly strong. The Sun, I suppose, is square the ascendant. Venus is moving to a square of Pluto. I don't think that the chart in itself is particularly wonderful. And then we've got Moon opposition Saturn. So I just want to just remind you, this is a post hoc chart. Yeah, in this case, ruler of the ascendant in the 10th seems to work, but I don't think that this chart is a wonderful advertisement for solar returns. I don't think that chart on its own, you would not look at that chart and say, oh, Kennedy's going to win. You also have to consider his rival, because he was up against Nixon. So Nixon was a Capricorn. So here is so just a reminder of Nixon. So Nixon would. Here's Richard Nixon's chart. So he was born January the 9th, 1913. So if he had won that election, you could argue, well, would you have looked at his January 1913 solar return to get an idea about whether or not he'd win? I'm not convinced. I think that would we look at his January 1961 chart solar return, or would one look at his January 1960 solar return? No, I think one looks at his January 1960 solar return. And here we're sort of talking about a bit of a comparison. So we would be comparing Nixon's solar return for 1960 with John F. Kennedy's solar return for 1960. So this is Nixon's 1960 solar return. I don't think that it is particularly spectacular. We've got a lot of stuff in the 12th house. We've got Neptune fairly close to the midheaven, which isn't great. Mercury conjunct Saturn. I don't think that is helpful. It's a sunrise chart, which you could say is certainly useful, and you could say the ruler of the ascendant is Saturn, but Saturn is, I suppose, it's quite close to the sun. I mean, I don't think that is a great chart. I think that Kennedy's chart is maybe, Kennedy's solar return is perhaps better than Nixon's solar return, but I wouldn't want to read too much into it. So what about Nixon's 1968 solar return? So Nixon stood twice, and so going back to Nixon's let's find Nixon's chart. Nixon's chart. So we want to know what his 1968 solar return is. Now, the reason we're looking at his 1968 solar return is because he won the 1968 election. So can we see victory in his 1968 solar return? Now, the reason I'm doing all this is because I kind of want to demonstrate that we can't just use solar returns on their own. Now, here we have South Node on the midheaven. South Node in Western astrology is about reputation, and I don't think that having South Node on the midheaven is particularly useful. I don't think that is a particularly good signature of someone who is going to win an election. And look at the ruler of the ascendant. The ruler of the ascendant is Saturn in Aries. So Saturn is in its fall in Aries, and the moon is opposition Neptune. So Nixon's 1968 solar return is not good, I would have said. Now, I mean, I did get a comment on my yesterday's video when I was looking at Marine Le Pen's chart, and Marine Le Pen has South Node on her ascendant, and the commenter suggested that I was underestimating the South Node and the power of the South Node. South Node is very ambitious. It wants things, and South Node on the midheaven, yeah, he's really keen to become president. He will do anything to become president. Maybe you can do that, you can perhaps be a bit sort of psychological about it. He did all sorts of stuff, I think, with in terms of the Vietnam War. I think Nixon was managed to persuade the South Vietnamese to delay accepting, to have a delay in one of their negotiations to make the Democrats look bad. So he did all sorts of manipulations in order to get to the White House. So that might be South Node conjunct the midheaven. But still, overall, I don't regard that as being a particularly wonderful solar return. I don't think that's a solar return necessarily of a victorious candidate. I think you'd be taking a big risk looking at that solar return and just saying, oh, South Node's on the midheaven, then they're going to win. I wouldn't have thought so. To my mind, I would have personally seen that South Node as being more of a negative. So that's just a reminder, we do have to be careful with returns. Now, being mindful of time and the fact that we might get a little bit bored of going through all these charts, why don't we look at Obama's solar return? So with Obama's solar return, he became elected in 2008. And I'm not going to compare him with John McCain's solar return. We are sort of running out of time here. So this is Obama's solar return. And for August the 4th, 2008, just before he got elected. Now, this solar return is problematic also. I think just looking at this solar return on its own, you'd see Mars opposition Uranus. I think with Mars opposition Uranus, I think you would perhaps be very concerned about an assassination or an assassination attempt. You could say that. As far as I know, there weren't any major attempts on Obama's life in 2008. Correct me if I'm wrong. He has got sort of South Node conjunct the Sun. I suppose that could be about his ambition, but I don't think that this is a particularly good chart. Jupiter in Capricorn. Jupiter in Capricorn on a descendant. I suppose that might say who he's up against. And one thing about the moon is at 23. The moon has just separated from a conjunction to Mars, so the moon is void of course in terms of making major aspects to major planets. Sure, the moon makes a square to Pluto, but it doesn't make any major aspects to major planets in that chart. So that is a problem with Obama's solar return. I don't think on the basis of Obama's solar return you would say that this is someone who's going to be elected president. So just a reminder that we need to be careful of reading too much into solar returns. What we can also do is we can compare the solar return with someone's natal chart. So here is Obama's natal chart in the middle, and here is the chart. Here is the solar return on the outer wheel. Now, what is interesting is at the time of his solar return, the North Node was right on his ascendant. That might be fortunate. So his transit, the North Node in the solar return for 2008 was conjunct his ascendant. Maybe that was critically important, and that's perhaps something we should have been focusing on. Maybe that really helped him win election. And but this Moon-Mars conjunction in the solar return was conjunct his Mars. He had Uranus opposition his Mars. So I think if we'd looked at Obama's solar return, I think we would have been really quite worried about it. And I think we would have been very concerned about whether or not he'd be assassinated and so forth. But just as, I suppose that's another reminder with astrology that it's easy to be melodramatic, to see these Uranus aspects and say, "Oh wow, that's really serious." But I suppose I'm being potentially myself being melodramatic. I've gone on and on about Mars conjunct Uranus on next month, July the 15th, on Algol, and I regarded this as being a horror event. I still regard it as being a horror event, but maybe it's just me being an astrologer, being melodramatic. We'll have that Mars conjunct Uranus on July the 15th, and nothing will happen, and I'll embarrass myself. It often happens like that, I'm afraid. So that's Obama's chart. So evidence here that we perhaps shouldn't read too much into solar returns. Now turning to the 2016 election, and we had two candidates, obviously. We had Trump and we had Hillary. And this is Hillary's solar return for the election. And just remember, a lot of people got it wrong. They predicted that Hillary was going to win. Now, one reason why Western astrologers got the result wrong is that very often Western astrologers support the Democrats. Maybe it's changing a bit, but by and large, the Western astrologers who were publishing their forecasts seem to be supportive of the Democrats. And so maybe that's why they got it wrong. There's always that bias. And if they had this solar return for Clinton, I don't know whether her exact time was available during the 2016 election. And I think that if you'd had this solar return for Hillary Clinton, I think you might have got it wrong as well. I think that this solar return for Hillary Clinton for 2016 is actually quite positive, because Mars is ruler of the midheaven. Well, Mars rules Scorpio, and Mars is in Capricorn. It's in its exaltation, and Mars is in Capricorn conjunct the ascendant, and I would have regarded that as being a pretty good sign. And Mars is making a square to Uranus, but as a straightforward signature, that does seem to me to indicate that Hillary Clinton would have won the 2016 election. Of course, there are other things to consider. Maybe what got her was the fact that, okay, we had Mars rising in Capricorn, that was great, but maybe it was the moon that did her in. Always look at the moon in the solar return. So the moon is in Virgo, and the moon is making a square to Venus and a square to Saturn. So perhaps it was that Venus-Saturn conjunction in Sagittarius, and the moon was making a square to that Venus-Saturn conjunction, and it was that moon to Saturn which led to her defeat. So that is certainly one way of looking at it. And of course, the moon is in the 8th house. But still, I do like the fact that ruler of the midheaven is on the ascendant, and that it's Mars in Capricorn. So that does seem to be good. But as we know, she lost. So then we have Trump, his solar return for 2016. Trump's solar return is quite strong in the sense that he's got Uranus on the midheaven. That's the first point. That suggests a surprise. Then we look at the ascendant in this chart, and there's Leo rising. Donald Trump, of course, has Leo rising. He's right on the cusp, but of Leo and Virgo. But I think general consensus seems to be he has Leo rising, and that sun is very strong. It's a daytime chart. It's The sun is in, obviously by definition, because it's a solar return, the sun is in Gemini, so it's in masculine planet, in a masculine sign. It's above the horizon, so it is a strong sun. Strong sun is sort of conjunct Venus, which I think is quite fortunate. We have Mercury in Gemini. So I think on the basis of that solar return, I don't think that solar return looks too bad. I'm not saying it's wonderful, and I'm certainly not saying that one could just look at that solar return and say, well, he's going to win because of that solar return. I don't think we could have said that, but there's nothing to say he's going to lose in that solar return. So with Hillary, it was a sort of a bit of a mixed picture. So Trump, of course, stood in. Trump, of course, stood again in 2020. So here is his solar return 4 years later. June the 13th, 2020, the solar return that preceded his defeat. And you might say, well, Chiron in the midheaven. Chiron is conjunct the midheaven. I don't know whether one would really read so much into Chiron, but Chiron is the great wound. It's going to be a wounding, I suppose, from Trump's perspective. This is Trump's perspective. I'm not saying this is the case, but this is the man who thinks he's been the victim of a great misjustice, the steal, as he would have said, the man who has had the election stolen from him. I'm not saying that is the case, by the way. And Pluto on the descendant. It's a bit difficult, that Pluto on the descendant, and the moon. The moon is sextile Jupiter. So some people might say, oh, he was going to win because the moon was going to be sextile Jupiter, but you can't just look at the chart just like that and just say, well, it's nice that there's a moon sextile Jupiter, but you have to consider the overall solar return, and you also have to consider lots of other stuff. But I don't think that solar return is great. The sun in his previous 2016 solar return was in his 11th house. Now it's in his 12th house. So that is really not quite so good. And the sun is sort of square Neptune, square Mars. Oh, and I think this is important. There's a Mars-Neptune conjunction, a very close Mars-Neptune conjunction. So that may be about his behavior, and Mars is about how he's using his energy. So if you're a critic of Donald Trump, you would see that Mars-Neptune conjunction as about using force in a completely inappropriate way. And I suppose you would think about what was going on January the 6th, 2001, and all the Capitol Hill protests and how he was behaving, and that moon, Mars, Neptune. I don't think that looks too good. So I would have said that Trump's solar return overall for 2020 wasn't particularly good. Okay, I now want to just look at this election. And I want to look at two charts. I want to look at Trump 2020, Trump 2024. So here is Trump's solar return for this year. I don't think this is a good solar return. If I was to look at this chart just looking at this chart alone, looking at nothing else, which of course one should never do, I don't think you'd be particularly positive. Firstly, the moon is applying to an opposition of Saturn. That is not good. And Saturn is on the midheaven. It's Saturn in Pisces on the midheaven. That indicates to me perhaps disappointment, maybe defeat. Okay, but the sun is in a 12th house again. 12th house is not great. Uh, the sun is conjunct Mercury, is conjunct Venus, so uh, here is a man who has charisma. But is it good enough? I think on its own, I don't think it is good enough. But then you have to consider, what about the solar return of his rival? Now, this raises the important question of which solar return do you use? Because Joe Biden's birthday is on November the 20th, and some would say that you could use the November the 20th, 2024 solar return, which is 2 weeks after the election, to help you predict whether or not Biden was going to win. So there are two different solar returns you could actually use. So looking at Joe Biden's if we look at Joe Biden's 2020, his solar return for last year. So here's Joe Biden's chart, and if we look at his solar return for 2023, which is the solar return preceding the election. I've looked at this chart before, and as far as I'm concerned, this chart is a train wreck. It is a terrible solar return for November 2023. We've got Mars-Uranus opposition, but then you could say, well, there was Mars-Uranus opposition in Obama's solar return just before he won. So maybe that's not so bad. I don't know. I still think it is pretty bad, but look at the moon. Moon is on a descendant. It's on the Mars-Uranus midpoint. Moon is separating from a square of Uranus, applying to a square of Mars, and I do feel that is a really difficult solar return. And the fact that you've got this Sun-Mars conjunction. Now, there was a Sun-Mars conjunction in the first solar return I looked at, which was a chart for Franklin Delano Roosevelt. But in that case, the Sun and Mars were rulers of the ascendant and the midheaven, and it was an exact conjunction. Now, the Sun is. This is not an exact conjunction. It's a close conjunction, but it's not exact. Sure, we have the Sun, ruler of the ascendant, but the ruler of the midheaven is Venus. So if it was Sun-Venus conjunction, fine. But this is a Sun-Mars conjunction. So I don't think that Sun-Mars conjunction is necessarily going to help. So I think that overall, this is not a good solar return. I think that although Trump's solar return prior to the election is not great, I would have said it was better than Joe Biden's solar return. But what if you were to say, well, no, you need to look at his solar return for after the election, that somehow the solar return has an impact on events taking place beforehand. And of course, this would be the solar return before his, I don't know, I suppose, do they have a second inauguration? But before the new term starts. So turning to Biden's 2024 solar return, this is different. Now, his 2024 solar return, this is for November the 19th, 2024. Remember, the election is at November the 5th. So this is 2 weeks after the election. So if you think that solar returns can act retrospectively, then there's certainly cause for optimism here, because Sun, ruler of the midheaven, is kind of in the first house, and Mars, ruler of the ascendant, is conjunct the 10th house, and the Sun and Mars are in mutual reception because Mars is in the sign of the Sun, Leo, and Sun in Scorpio is in the sign of Mars. So if you are a supporter of the Democrats and you want evidence that Biden's going to win, this November the 19th, 2024 solar return perhaps gives you evidence. And I think it is quite a good chart, and the moon is in Cancer. So this chart might give you what you want, but it's only one solar return. So I've gone on and on and on about solar returns just to try to give them some kind of perspective. I think that solar returns are not going to give you the answer. So having looked at all these solar returns, I don't feel that we can tell, for example, whether Biden or Trump is going to win on the basis of a solar return. I do think, though, we need to give careful thought with Joe Biden's solar return, whether or not we put emphasis on his November 2024 solar return or on his November 2023 solar return. I think that could be important because, as I've just shown you, his November 19, 2024 solar return on its own seems to indicate success. But again, I'm not making any predictions at this stage. So thank you very much for listening. Sorry to bombarded you with so many return charts. I hope you found this video of some interest. If you did enjoy the video, I'd be grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be really grateful if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. So thank you very much for listening, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.